Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the first MasterControl hosted webinar of 2021. Today, we're going to talk about navigating constant change with flexible quality systems. Our speakers today will be Aaron Wright and Kim Jackson, both are senior product managers at MasterControl. Before we get started, let me just go through a couple housekeeping items. During the presentation, if you have any technical difficulties, there's a little chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Just chat us in there and we'll work to get your issue resolved as quickly as possible. There's also a Q&A icon. Use the Q&A function to ask us questions. You can ask questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll be addressing those questions at the end when the ladies are finished presenting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Kim to go ahead and kick us off.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. So today we'll be talking about how you get a cloud-first mindset with your quality systems, and especially with risk, and especially given the current world program, what that looks like as it impacts to your business model. We'll also talk about the next normal. We're always talking about the new normal, but what's going to come next? What is our new next normal when it comes to the quality management systems in the life sciences world, and using holistic data-driven decision-making to make key decisions for your company and your business model and the impacts that it has on it. I am Aaron Wright. I am a senior product manager for MasterControl over data and compliance, and I am joined today by Kim Jackson. Kim, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, I'm Kim Jackson. I'm a senior product manager over quality event management, post-market, and risk.
All right. So some of the key takeaways that we wanted to have you take away from this presentation today is understanding how the digitalization of your data and the digitalization of your platforms really over the past, and this trend that's been happening in industry over the past 5 years, 3 years, this last year especially, resolves a lot of the common quality issues and pains that you're seeing in your quality management system.
We're also going to talk about how having a connected platform, having all those pieces working together, makes you a more resilient company, makes you able to withstand all the changes that are coming at you, and makes you more adaptable and agile to respond to those changes as they happen.
Because everything has changed, right?
Everything.
We're also looking at those benefits of connecting that quality and that risk data to drive better decision making for your business model. Is that by having access to all of this digital platform and information isn't enough just to have access to it. You have to use it to drive your decisions, and how we can help with that.
And beyond being able to just make better decisions, it'll really help you establish a culture of quality, and using that connected data and those metrics to really help your company thrive in the changing environments, everything that's happening right now and going into the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Kim, we talked about this as on the first key takeaway of our presentation, some of the common quality challenges that people in industry are facing right now. Especially, this idea of moving to digitalization and having everything available on the cloud in a digital format. Paper is dead in our industry.
Yeah, and not just paper, but having, just Word documents on a shared network. That's dead too, because you need to really be able to share things no matter where you are. You don't have to be logged into a VPN. You don't have to be on site. You need to be able to access your data anywhere that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things, Gartner has this amazing quotation that they put out 2 years ago about how having a no cloud policy will in 2020 will be like having a no internet policy in 2020. It's, this having everything digital, having everything on the cloud and in a structured format, like you were touching on, that a lot of companies have. And it's an Excel spreadsheet, but now it's in their shared drive. So that's all in the cloud, right? And that's not exactly what we're talking about. Is that by having everything in a structured format, in a platform, it gives you a lot easier way to communicate and that information in a structured manner outside of just having access to it. It gives you ability to kind of connect that data to other places in your quality system.
Absolutely. And you never want to have to Slack somebody and ask where a particular document is. You need to be able to find it yourself. You don't want to disrupt other things that are happening within your company because you can't find a document. You don't want to be that person.
No, absolutely. And even just the context switching of having to go from first I'm working on writing up this kappa. I'm trying to figure out, how this even happened, doing my root cause analysis of an event that occurred. And now I need to switch context and go, oh, I need to make sure that I have this FMEA spreadsheet that's filled out and sent over to these people because they don't have access to it in the system. And you lose that train of thought. You lose that ability to complete work when you're constantly having to context switch and find information in those non-structured areas.
Absolutely. And the amount of time that it takes, it takes like 20 minutes to get back to what you were doing. And so the amount of time it takes really costs you money at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And it impacts your quality. This last bullet point we're talking about of maximizing the quality, of not being able to focus and really have that clear line of thought and that clear strategy approach. It helps, by minimizing disruptions, you are maximizing quality by allowing you to focus and actually put quality effort into, as opposed to being pulled in 1,000 different directions, which we know everyone in industry at all times is pulled in 1,000 different directions.
Yeah, and we all know that what happens when you get interrupted is you lose your place in your document and typos start to happen, copying and pasting errors start to happen. Quality just goes down when interruptions go up.
Absolutely, absolutely. So having all of this data structured and in a cloud, in a single platform, just resolves so much of this issue. It gives you that communication, the collaboration, it minimizes those disruptions and maximizes quality.
Yep.
So let's talk about this improving the agility and resilience in a platform. So we've talked about having everything in the cloud and having access to it and having shared access to it in a structured way. What are some of the ways of having this, your entire quality system in a single platform, help with that connectivity and agility?
Oh, one immediately comes to mind when a deviation occurs. You want to be able to get to that SOP right away, or those work instructions, and be able to identify exactly what was deviated from, how it was deviated from, and what the impact is. And if that stuff isn't connected, you're searching through unstructured data to try and find that SOP, to try and understand what the impact is. If it's all connected, you can move so much faster and even help prevent those things from happening again, because you know where and why they occurred and you have just a better insight into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of touches into that resilience of your quality system, is that if there is a deviation, you can root cause it very quickly and tie it to the impacted procedures and get those notifications and information out immediately. You're not having to trace through multiple systems, export this report, do a little bit of structuring and, reformatting of the data, port it into another document, pull in other information. Is that it's all right there at the top of your fingertips. To be able to respond to any issues in your quality system as a kind of a single platform.
Absolutely.
And they talk about this year, 2020 is the year like no other. It absolutely feeds into that idea of we're not able to go on site anymore. We're not able to even, regulatory inspectors aren't even doing on-site inspections anymore. Everything is virtual and remote. And so you don't have that war room option of that little closet with everybody quickly going through those papers. Having everything online and in a single platform makes it so much faster and so much simpler to gather that information during regulatory inspection.
Yeah, absolutely. And the companies that can respond to those regulatory inspections with confidence and authority and have all of their information right there, they're the ones who are going to last through all these changes. They're the ones who are going to be resilient.
Absolutely. And so, we touched on this again, like the year like no other. COVID has just changed everything. There was already a trend and a move in the industry towards moving towards the cloud, of moving towards digitalized information, and it went from a nice to have, to like, oh, this is, here's the pitch for all the improvements, to a must. You physically couldn't get together and get that information together. And so
it has been amazing how the IT people at these companies have responded so fast to having to shift everything digitally, and how we've taken our manufacturing processes and taken them down to just the essential personnel, streamlined everything to be able to still get product out the door, life-saving products, life-changing products, while doing most of the quality work, the inspection work, remotely. It's been amazing to see this. And they couldn't have done it without knowing exactly how to do it based on the data they had at their fingertips.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this was a huge change in the year like no other, as we say, for manufacturing alone. And so, being able to figure out where you can streamline your process, where you can take away that human direct input process.
Mhm.
Maybe now we can do it on the cloud. Now we can do it from the safety of our kitchen, as opposed to having to be at risk on directly on the manufacturing
Right.
floor, and having the data available to support those business decisions and changes.
Yep. Because if you don't know your current processes, if you couldn't quickly get to that information and understand what pieces could be changed, how would you know? You just wouldn't.
Absolutely. And also it's going to be a site by site decision. It's site by,
Mhm.
each site's going to have their own procedures and processes and approaches. And so having that kind of global connected data is so important for being able to making this pivot during COVID.
Oh, absolutely. If one site can do it, why not another site? Depending on what you make, what your procedures are at another site. But being able to see what the other sites, what the rest of the company has done, can help you inform your choices at your site for your unique situation.
And we're focusing on COVID because that's the easiest example to use
Oh,
right
yeah.
now because it's the biggest thing going on. But imagine what you could do for the rest of your manufacturing process, for
Mhm.
the rest of your quality system process by having access to this data. The improvements that you could make through your process and streamlining that information and decision making, even outside of a world-altering event like a global pandemic.
Absolutely. Like you were saying, if COVID is our new normal, what's the next normal? How are we going to keep this culture of change and continuous improvement and being able to shift on a dime going forward?
Mm. Well, and let's talk about how that happens, and especially focusing on that risk portion, because making all
Mm.
of these changes to your qualified, validated process, your qualified, validated materials, et cetera, by making these global changes of responding to a global pandemic or whatever the next normal is going to be, the next massive change in our world, you have to look at risk assessment. You have to look at how to manage the risks of those change, mitigate those risks of those change. And so, what does that look like in the as our product manager of risk, Kim, you can speak to this very well. What does that look like in this next normal?
Yeah, I mean, all of it is about being able to put a plan in place and execute on that plan. Even if the plan has to change, as long as you have a plan and you can justify the changes that you make, that's really what the key is here as we shift to old normal to new normal to next normal. So putting that plan in place and being able to execute on it. And with ISO 14971, being able to keep those intended uses of the product at the very forefront of any changes that you make, keeping in mind those hazards. And are you introducing any new hazards with your process changes? Do any of the old hazards fall away because your processes have changed? Being able to track all of that, and it's very, very difficult on a spreadsheet, which I know is how a lot of people are doing it these days. But as long as you have a plan and you can execute on that plan and you can show that plan, at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Being able to mitigate those risks as they come because you thought about them ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the great quotations that came from the FDA, Dr. Amy Abernathy, is that 50% of critical information in research, those connections uh, those connections of the data silos are trapped in unstructured documents. They're trapped in Word documents that aren't on the cloud, that we're not tagging the information to be able to pull out those insights for them. And
Yeah,
so,
oh,
oh,
sorry
go
about
right
that.
ahead, Kim. All you, all you.
I was just thinking one of the interesting things about risk management is with that information in unstructured documents, you may have a process FMEA or failure mode effects analysis, and you may have a product FMEA. How do those two connect? What are the touch points? Does that process lead to manufacturing of products X, Y, and Z? If you change the process, do you look at those ripple effects? And if those are in unstructured documents, you may forget a product that is tied to a particular process. It is very high risk to have these in unstructured documents.
Absolutely. And even just from the risk perspective, but also giving you better insights into the types of
Oh
changes
yeah.
and the level of risk about this information. And so if you have all of your risk, your risk matrices in an Excel document here, and you have all of your SOPs and deviations and quality systems in the
Mhm.
cloud, you're not getting the insights about that information that you can say, oh, when I make X, Y, and Z change to this process, here are the risks. But like you're saying, you're not seeing that ripple effect. You're not going to get able that reportable information of that connection of this changed with this risk caused this outcome. And being
Mhm.
able to draw that line all the way back. It can be so difficult when you don't have that digitalized quality management system with that risk information in a structured data format to be able to report on and actually provide appropriate insights into kind of what those failure modes are, even in your quality system.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you've got your deviations in one system or on paper or in Word documents, and you have your risk assessments in a spreadsheet on another network, you're never going to be able to make the connections the way you need to make them. You're going to spend hours tracking and trending through deviation information to even identify that you've run into a hazard.
And you're almost making decisions on a gut feeling at that
Oh
point, as
yeah,
opposed to actual data-driven decision making, because you
yeah,
just don't have access
absolutely.
to that data in the silo.
Yeah, risk management isn't one of those things that should be an art. It should be a science.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Kim, you and I have been talking a little bit on the previous slide about finding those patterns of the data. Is that when you have it in, different information silos, they're not connected. You're trusting either your gut feeling or even the human eye to kind of discover these
Mm,
patterns. When there's so many better and more robust ways of doing that, particularly through machine learning and artificial intelligence or predictive analytics, is that you can know that when operation, when machinist one does an equipment calibration across X, Y, and these three sites, and then 2 months down the line, we're continually seeing a failure point with the equipments. We can not only can we trace it back to the individual piece of equipment, but maybe this machinist who did the calibration.
absolutely. And one of the things I keep thinking about with finding patterns is in post-market, being compliant to be able to identify the signals that there's a problem with your product. And those signals could be coming from myriad different sources. You don't know where those signals are coming from if you have unstructured data. You can't monitor it effectively. It's impossible. You can't have people monitoring Slack. You can't have people monitoring chat rooms. You can't have people monitoring medical associations or conferences all at the same time. You would have to have an army to do it. But if you have connected platforms, if you have connected data, if you have feeds or alerts set up, you can start to collect that data and then identify the trends on your products, no matter where that data is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the hardest things about post-market is knowing what's a product and what's a rest of world problem, right?
Right.
So, certainly, is it a misuse of the product? Is it just someone happened to have a headache that day, as
Right.
that turned into a migraine? That's not necessarily being caused by your product, but being able to filter out, it's not enough just to have all of that data together in a single information in a data dump. It's being able to find the meaningful information within that data to find those patterns.
Yep. Got to
Which
filter through the noise first.
absolutely, yeah, the signal to noise ratio, particularly in
Uh-huh.
post-market, of trying to get down to the root cause if it's even a product issue, and then the root cause within your production process. And doing that with unstructured data just isn't even possible. And doing it with the human eye, even with structured data, can be incredibly difficult without using robust tools of a single platform
Mm-hmm.
for predictive analytics or machine learning to kind of give out
Absolutely.
those insights.
And then trying to tie it back to risk.
And then trying to assess the risk of how this even happened and mitigating this risk from the first place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, we've talked about this a lot of how having all this qualitative data helps you make decisions, but it dramatically improves your ability to make context-based, data-driven decisions. It's
Mm-hmm.
no longer just that gut feeling, is that you now have the evidence that you can tie everything back to across the multiple areas of your quality system. And another really great point about having this connected platform and having your data in a structured manner in a connected platform is it creates holistic data decision making. For the longest time, it was your quality department who would have to dive into all the deviations. It was your quality department doing that root cause analysis. And it was people who might be a little, because they were the only ones who had access to that information. And so now
Right.
we're seeing a big change in industry for this approach.
And it's not just quality, and it's not just those strategic business decisions on the day-to-day. It's also at the executive level, and really understanding where your company needs to go to create the next big thing, solve the next big challenge. If you don't have the data, you can't make those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. We keep talking about how gut feelings just aren't enough anymore. And it's not enough just for your quality group. Your manufacturing group needs to be providing in their data for holistic data decisions. Your quality control group, as opposed to just your quality assurance group, your operations group. There's all these areas where you're getting feedback about your manufacturing process, your creation process, your procedures, to then drive really true changes in your decisions based upon that risk, as
Absolutely.
identified throughout the rest of, blah, 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 as identified through the rest of the company.
Absolutely. And one of the things that has really come to the forefront with COVID, again, bringing it back to COVID and our new normal, is supply chain. Because there have been so many supply chain disruptions, because it's not just your company that's affected, it's all the companies. So the manufacturer of your, special widget that you need to make your med device suddenly gets taken down by COVID, and they're down to one production line and they can't get you your shipment. What do? It impacts everything. So with holistic data decision making, you can keep an eye on all of your suppliers, your supply chain. Having everything connected helps you understand what's going to be the impact if one of your suppliers goes down. What's your plan? What do you put in place? How do you mitigate that risk to delivering your product?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, seeing that those tendrils of all that risk management, just not outside of quality, not even in your single department, but like you were saying, that global supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of, as we take it back, we're talking about this holistic risk, is that it's no longer just quality's responsibility, is that we have seen huge changes in ISO standards to move risk management and risk consideration throughout all levels of a company. And so there's this alarming statistic that we want to talk about, that only 6% of organizations believe their entire company contributes to meeting quality standards, which is a little horrifying when you consider an entire company creates a product.
Right. And it's one of those interesting things where you don't really think about, oh, well, our entire organization believes that, quality is quality's problem. But then there's kind of this interesting mentality and this culture that develops where, oh, quality is making it hard for us to do our jobs. When no, it really is that quality is a mentality, not just a department. Should be baked into every single thing that you do. And when that happens, then you start to get this culture shift where quality doesn't make it hard to do your jobs. Quality is your job.
Absolutely.
And then you end up with a better product at the end of the day.
I love that. Is that quality isn't an outside force. Quality is your job. I really love that phrasing. And we see that right in the ISO standards. So ISO 9001 changed into risk management being responsibility across all levels of the organization. You mentioned ISO 14971, changing kind of that risk management procedure to require all levels and all risks to be considered. And so really how everybody is playing a part in building a quality product and making sure that we're all considering the risks and the quality work that we're doing for that product.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it kind of feeds into that same risk management. And so what are some of the failures that you are our resident expert on risk in life sciences? What are some areas that you've seen risk management go sideways in your experience?
One of the ways I've seen it go sideways is when companies put such an emphasis on the paperwork and not the thought process that should be represented by the paperwork. So they create this big, beautiful FME spreadsheet that's just absolutely monstrous, and it took, you know, a team of 20 3 months to put together before the product came out. And then they never look at it again because, hey, we did the FMEA, we never need to revisit it. When that should now be a tool for you guys, looking at it every time you think of a risk. What is the impact of that risk? How do we handle it? And using it as an analytical tool. So instead of putting the emphasis on, yeah, we did the paperwork, we're good, I've seen companies do that, and they don't look at it as an ongoing living, breathing tool that they should be referencing every time something comes up. I've also seen people just say, hey, you know what, we did a quick scoring and everything's fine. This doesn't occur. They don't put any thought, the process behind why they gave something the score that they did. Oh, you know, severity by occurrence, done. Never think about it again. Well, wait. How did you come to that severity conclusion? What inputs did you have into that? It's not enough to just document that severity or that occurrence. What are your inputs? How did you come to that? You need to be able to prove that and put that supporting documentation into wherever it is you're making that decision. So it becomes really, really interesting when people just say, yep, scored it, or yep, we created an FMEA, yep, we have the paperwork, without using that as the tool, because that's really what it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because we're also seeing that across regulated industry and industry standards. And so the recent change for the CDRH to move away from the documentation. It's like, it's not enough just to have a risk plan. It's, you have to have the critical thinking behind the risk plan. What we care about the most is you defending why you documented it this way. We're not looking to mark everything as high risk, every part of your procedure as high risk. We're looking for, why do you think it's low risk, and really sharing that critical thinking behind that information. And also, the industry move away from ALARP, that low is reasonably practical for a risk. This kind of moves into our next topic of continually analyzing that risk. So the failure that you noted was one and done. And risk management and risk mitigation is part of that continual improvement process. Your risk will never be low enough, particularly when you are dealing with patient safety and that the health and the safety of your product and patient safety.
Yep, absolutely. And that ties right into the new EU MDR changes, where they're really putting that emphasis on that post-market safety and risk analysis. And they're really tying together the fact that you should be doing risk assessments, you should be looking at risk, even in post-market, especially in post-market.
Absolutely. Which ties back to what we were talking about before, is that cloud connectivity of our data for your QMS. It is not enough to, even if you have a spreadsheet that you revisit on a weekly basis for your risk mitigations, are you going to be manually putting in all of those inputs to double check the risk to see that your risk mitigations are in place? I mean, there's no possible way to do that. You don't have the time or resources or even brain power to gather all of those inputs, filter them through your risk process. When it's in an Excel spreadsheet, even on a shared drive, if it's even on the cloud, if it's not connected to your data, if it's not built into that QMS, there's no way that you could possibly gather the necessary information that you need to for, the EU MDR compliance.
Yeah, it really definitely comes back to having everything connected, because like you said, you're not going to have the brain power, the resources, the money to put into doing risk assessments every single time something happens, which is one of the failures of risk at this point, because it really is an emphasis on one and done paperwork. We've got it covered, and not saying, hey, we now have this great plan that we put in place. We should really use that plan.
Maybe we should execute on that plan.
Maybe we should execute on that plan.
No.
But it makes it very, very difficult to actually do that when you don't have your inputs feeding in automatically, or the trends popping up via machine learning, or any of those other things that make it so much easier to identify when you need to go to your risk plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kim, when you and I are talking, we're talking where the examples we give are almost like single site, single product. This isn't even looking at a global
Oh, yeah.
implementation, multi-site, multi-product, hundreds of thousands of users and hundreds of
Mhm.
thousands of pieces of data to come in and to sift through that signal to noise ratio of what's important, and then taking what's important and putting it through your risk matrix and executing on that risk plan.
Yeah.
I, having to do that on a spreadsheet is mind-boggling.
Right. Having to do it on a spreadsheet at a global level, it's astronomically impossible. There's just too much data.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it also, again, it silos that data when you're looking at the global data. So maybe that there are multiple sites who are all encountering the same issue, and that you have multiple sites that are all doing the same root cause analysis and repeating that work. When if it was all in the cloud, and if all of that data was connected in kind of a single data lake, you'd be able to get those insights across multiple sites.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're finding right now is that companies don't surface these types of connections, these types of commonalities until like an end of year management review or an executive review, because nobody's authorized to get all of that data from a global perspective and look at it holistically. Every site is doing the best they can in a silo. And it's not just because of the data silos, it's also because of cultural silos.
Mm. Which feeds again back into is that quality is everyone's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Risk management is everyone's responsibility. I'm sensing some trends and themes here, Kim, and all
I
the
sense a
information.
theme.
um, and so again, it really goes into that culture of quality, is that it's not enough just to have, even like you were saying, even if everyone is on the cloud and has their data in a singleized platform, having a culture of quality where you have access to multi-sites, where you can see trends across sites, locations, users, experiences, it gives you the ability to surface that information and have true insights into your data and the risks.
Yep, well said.
A lot of the things that we're working on at MasterControl right now is really data-driven insights, is that we want to provide, MasterControl is a single platform for your entire QMS, even including your manufacturing information, and being able to pull all that information, all those risks, all of those quality events into a single dashboard view, and to kind of surface those key critical areas. You can see when your cycle time is improving or not improving. You can kind of see what your complaint trends are looking at
Right.
for individual products, and being able to drill down into that information.
Right. And even year over year across multiple products, really giving those executives the decision information that they need to take action and develop whatever their next normal is going to be. And
Yeah.
one of my passions right now is getting the risk data out of the spreadsheets and into the system.
Absolutely, absolutely. And not just the risk of the risk assessment, but those risk mitigations, and seeing
Oh
those risk
yeah.
mitigation effectiveness checks, and actually being able to report on across your entire QMS what the impact of those mitigations look like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you just simply can't do that in a spreadsheet or in siloed data.
Nope.
Especially here at MasterControl, we are so excited to be kicking off our machine learning initiatives to be able to really dive into the information provided to us from our customers, to give you insights into your products. And so, we're talking about the post-market of being able to have those complaints come in. We can be able to, have machine learning tell us what the most likely root cause is going to be based upon historic root causes. And so if we're having an issue with product A, we're able to go in and determine X, Y, and Z risks that might have had an issue in the past, or these A, B, and C, management of changes or changes that were made to the process that may have caused this risk. And so really having the machine learning initiatives to learn about patterns in your data and being able to surface them to see that connected information.
Yep. And it's really all about helping people make better decisions. The machine's not
Absolutely.
going to make the decisions for you. You still need to make the decisions. Just one of the best tools to help you make better decisions.
Not quite at Skynet yet.
Not Skynet.
But no, exactly right. Is that machine learning is designed to find those patterns in the data that you might not be able to sift through given the volume of information. And so training these machine learning algorithms to find these commonalities in data. And then surface them so that you can act upon them. And the more that we work with this machine learning, the more data that we feed it, the more insightful information that they can provide to us. And so again, that single platform is so important to these kinds of machine learning initiatives.
Absolutely. It's going to be so great when we have machine learning that can tell us, hey, maybe we ought to issue a small voluntary recall instead of waiting for a problem to get so big because we couldn't see it and the FDA sees it first and
Yeah.
then says we have to do a mandatory recall.
Yeah, absolutely. And even looking at, machine learning's cost of quality of doing a recall, instead of having to manually make that decision and then doing that investigation into what this is going to cost the company, et cetera, is that you can see it coming through the predictive analytics and machine learnings of,
Yep.
under X, Y, and Z circumstances, we did a voluntary recall of here, and here's the impact it had. I'm seeing A, B, and C circumstances coming, and by I truly mean the machine algorithm.
Yes.
You might want to consider X, Y, and Z, or being able to surface those insights that people don't have the ability to go through and find those connections.
Absolutely.
Which feeds back into that continuous improvement. We had talked about how that risk function really drives the continuous improvement, as well as continuing actioning upon that risk mitigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you understand the risks of a change you want to make to your company, maybe you had some data that came through and said, you know what, we could really improve our cycle time if we did X, Y, and Z. Well, now we're going to look at our risk plan. And if we did Z, that increased risk to patient safety exponentially. Maybe we should just do X and Y and just say, hey, maybe we don't get quite the cycle time benefit that we wanted, but at least patient safety won't be affected. And if you have all of that data connected, you can make informed improvements to your processes without putting patient safety risk at play.
Yeah, absolutely. And by constantly mitigating and putting in those risk mitigations, moving away from that ALARP of, oh, well, we've considered this risk mitigated, we're done now. By continually feeding those risk mitigations and implementations of those risk mitigations into your quality system, you can see that continuous improvement of your quality system and actually have true measurements and outputs through the data. And again, see that high level improvement across your company and business model through those machine learning initiatives.
Yeah. Alternatively, if you're continually putting in play certain risk mitigations and you're not seeing that it's really mitigating those risks, it's very hard to see that kind of trend, that kind of negative trend on risk mitigation when at the surface level, it looks like, yep, everything's cool, moving on. But when you start to look at it as a trend, that risk mitigation doesn't really mitigate it. That's very, very difficult to detect if you don't have machine learning or if you don't have the connected data in order to make the right improvements to your risk mitigation plan. Because the risk mitigation plan, again, is a living, breathing thing that you may need to make adjustments to.
That's a really great point, Kim. So that concludes our presentation on risk and data-driven decision-making. I think a couple of questions have come in through the chat, so I'll pass this back to Jen.
Thank you, Erin and Kim. That was an excellent presentation. I hope that everybody out there that's watching today was able to get some salient points to take away and take back to their organizations. So one of the things that I took away from Kim and Erin from your presentation today is that by having a connected system, we have visibility into the entire quality process. And when we have that visibility, that's what really helps build that culture of quality, because now you can see the full process, the dependencies across departments, and the accountabilities. And I think that gets everybody kind of buying into that quality culture. And we talk about that a lot at MasterControl, and you touched on it today, but I just wanted to share that. I thought that was an excellent point that you guys brought up. So we've had a couple questions come in so far around machine learning. Of course, it's a hot topic. So how do you see machine learning having an impact, say, over the next 10 years?
In every possible way. It's going to be my short answer. The too long didn't read. In every possible way. Machine learning is fantastic in that it can take such huge areas of data, huge swaths of information, and find those patterns that we aren't able to process. You know, computers are just incredibly smarter than us. And so finding those patterns, finding the link between this machinist who worked at 3 different sites doing a calibration across 9 different months and having a common failure point there, of seeing that when the boiler gets up to 100 degrees, arbitrarily, you know, that it has X, Y, and Z product information, product impacts down the road. You know, there's just so many ways that we can train our algorithms to see those patterns to provide meaningful information. But that's not the end of it, right? You know, the machine learning is only as good as well as the model that you train it. And so it's so important to have every part of your quality system looking at what those insights coming out of this machine learnings are to give meaning to the data. And so, you know, one things I like to say about machine learning is that a lot of it's like correlational. It's not causational. We can say, here are the connected pieces. Here's the typical areas that we see, and here's where we recommend that you look. But we're not, you know, machine learning can't do root cause. Machine learning can't provide meaning to the data. It can only provide the connections of the data. And so it's so important that all parts of your quality department, even when using machine learning, are able to attribute meaning to that information that's being brought out of those algorithms.
Yeah, I love that point that you brought up, Erin, that the machines can do a lot of the heavy lifting for us, but then at the end of the day, the humans still have to take all of that information and contextualize it in order to make the right decisions.
Right.
I think that's a very important point. So another question that's come in, or it's kind of a common topic that comes up a lot, is with respect to budget and the cost to implement. So a couple areas, if you could touch on here, if someone doesn't have a huge budget, what are some small steps that they can take to kind of start their digital journey and start that process? And then how do you convince the C-suite to spend the dollars to make that digital transformation?
Do you want to take that, Kim, or do you want me?
I'll start us off.
Okay.
I think I think one of the first steps you could take is getting in kind of low level with getting your documents into a connected system. So focusing on those documents first, then shifting into quality events. So once you have your documents in a connected system, at least then you could say, yes, this is an approved document. No, that's not an approved document. And you can reduce the risk of people following the wrong procedures and the wrong written instructions, and convincing your C-suite to do that by putting in place a presentation of some sort saying, hey, if we put these things in here, we would reduce root cause of deviations by X percentage because everybody would be on the correct version of the document. That's huge. And it's a very simple step you can take. Erin, anything to add?
To touch on that, you know, as we expand our abilities with machine learning and the information, being able to report on that cost of quality. And so there's a concept out there in industry of being able to report on how much money you're spending. You know, what's the aphorism? A pinch of prevention versus a pound of cure.
Right.
And so by having the information there for your risk mitigations to really measure them in the beginning, you can measure that cost of quality. If, you know, while yes, there is an upfront cost, you see that improvement throughout your entire business model. That yes, by spending a pinch on prevention, we're saving X, Y, and Z money on a pound of cure by, you know, a worst case scenario, a recall of your product.
Yep.
And
Or
so,
even just going to a CAPA. CAPAs can be very expensive.
yeah. Or, you know, in looking at process improvements and those continuous improvements at the risk of reducing the scrap that you have during your manufacturing process, of being able to improve, having that continuous improvement into your business model and building your products, overall saves you time and saves you effort and lowers your risk for patient safety and product quality. And so even if there is that upfront cost, which, you know, all things have a cost, the amount of money and effort and time and PR damage by having to do a product recall versus true patient safety issues in doing a product recall, and regulatory inspections cost money. Having that cost of quality up front and knowing what that can prevent in the long run saves you so much time and effort.
Yep. And I think that's a really good story to tell your C-suite if that's what you're looking for. And I hope
Absolutely.
we've just gave you some good ideas.
Look for the cost of quality dashboard for insights coming soon.
Great points on the, and you guys use the word cost, but I like to use the word investment. Anytime that you're making, in addition to your company's technology or architecture, you're investing in that company for the future. And just going back to being flexible and agile is a business differentiator. When we think about COVID, the businesses that were able to flex quickly are the ones that were able to jump on treatments or PPE or therapeutics, and get that going. And then when you have digital systems in place and you get that product to market sooner, which we really needed in the situation of COVID, you're also generating revenue faster. That's another great C-suite point to bring up, because they love to see revenue going to the bottom line a little bit sooner. Okay, so our next question goes back to the culture of quality. You've talked about getting your entire company to pay attention to quality, that it's everybody's responsibility. Do you have any specific examples from your customers where you've seen them build a culture of quality because they've implemented a digital QMS?
I have, specifically in getting digital quality events up and running, having all of your kind of department heads being a part of that process and getting those processes up and running, getting them to really buy in and take ownership of their piece of that process, whether it's simply providing an input, reporting events, identifying events when they happen, getting everybody on board at that ground level. That's really what made the difference. People that were brought in later definitely had a harder time shifting the cultural mindset and getting people to adopt a new connected QMS and all being a part of it, part of the culture of quality.
And even bringing it down a level, we have that, Kim has constructed a beautiful event reporting form of something happened.
Yeah.
It doesn't get into the details. And so, you're able to give access to everyone in your company, from the person on the manufacturing line all the way up to your C-suite, of the something happened form, and being able to launch and review that something happened, that event report, from every level of your product creation team, to be able to report on that, is so important, of kind of, again, building that culture of quality, of having maybe someone doesn't know, is this a deviation? Is this a non-conformance? Is this an issue review? But they just know that something happened. And so having the very quick ability to say, something happened, and giving that power to reporting to everyone at every level in your company.
Yep. There have been a lot of companies that I've worked with where people on the kind of the front line aren't able to launch event reports and let people know that something happened. They have to go to their manager, tell their manager that something happened, and then the manager puts it into the system. Well, once you have one verbal handoff, information gets lost. So empowering the people on the front lines, the people who are actually experiencing something that happens, getting them to put that directly into the system without a verbal handoff or a written handoff first is extremely empowering. And it gets them thinking about, hey, look, I made this big difference by identifying this thing that happened and getting it to the right people at the right time, and giving them the explanation that they needed, the right information, without having to go through anybody else or playing any kind of game of telephone.
And having that ownership of reporting is that, this really drives home that quality is everyone's responsibility, is that it's part of your job role, it's part of your function to report quality events of something happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's part of a company's success to have quality products. We all know the best brands in the world are the ones that provide quality products as part of their offering to the public. Okay. Looks like we have time for one more question. So you have talked a lot about a lot of different advanced technologies today. Can you give some examples of practical uses of those technologies with some of your customers?
One of the ways of the practical uses, we're working on having these great insights into your connected data. And so being able to see trends in, I have had more post-market complaints against product A, but only specifically product A that was manufactured in these 2 locations over these lines. And so it gives you a much deeper insight just by having the data structured and in a single platform to make decisions about where that post-market is coming from. It guides your root cause analysis immediately instead of having to sift through, okay, well, this complaint came from Boston. Okay, this complaint came from New Hampshire. It goes through into a much more systematic way to surface that information much sooner, sooner to you to really drive that root cause analysis. I know for risk that there's a lot of predictive information that we're pulling on. I don't want to step on Kib's toes.
No, I mean, it's going to be one of the most game-changing things to have the risk data to the extent that we envision it connected into the platform, connected up to our machine learning, and really being able to predict when something may occur just based on the known hazards that we're watching for. That's going to be game-changing. Really excited for that. And I know the customers we've talked to specifically about risk are really excited about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving your process qualification, your process validation assessments to be more real time is that you can have more predictive, and you're not just basing it off of the assessment that an engineer or a process validation engineer came up with in the beginning of, okay, the failure point for the hood of this manufacturing line is 60 days. But maybe we're consistently seeing it failing at 47 days. Instead of having to circle back and go through that same engineering assessment, we can have those predictive analytics saying, ooh, these hoods are failing at 47. Here's the possible risks that might have been causing that. Let's talk about where is it overheating? Are we tightening the screws too much during the calibration? All of those pre-planned known risks kind of driving in that assessment. So it kind of shortcuts that cycle time of finding that root cause.
Absolutely. Somebody won't have to sift through a spreadsheet of different effects that could be happening based on that hood failing at 47 days instead of 60 days. We'll be able to say, hey, what could happen? Here you go. Here's the information. We think it might be this one based on these other things that we see happening over here. That would be really cool.
Technology is cool. I mean, it is, it's great. Like constant improvement is a wonderful thing. Like I know change is hard sometimes, but once you've adopted new technologies, I think one of the things we find with our customers is they're so glad they did it. And it takes a bit of time to get up to speed on a system or to implement it. But then once it's going, it is very cool. And it's a game changer with respect to operations. So I want to thank Kim and Aaron again for their time today. Wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share some of your knowledge with us. Again, to the audience, I hope that you took away some great points from today's presentation that you're able to utilize within your own companies. And again, if we did not answer any of your questions online today, then we will go ahead and get back with you directly via email. Our next webinar that's hosted by MasterControl will be on March 3rd, and we'll be talking about how manufacturing can integrate with quality and for a more streamlined process. It should be equally as entertaining as the one we had today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.